$750,000 house, if that's the average.
Yeah.
That's the average in New Zealand, right? You can buy a house in Auckland for 750 grand, but there might be people who are living in quite nice parts of town renting. And if they were to buy in that area, like you alluded to, they're actually going to need serious cash to be able to have the deposit, but also service the debt.
Welcome to Checks and Balances, brought to you by Lighthouse Financial. I'm Michael Vincent. That's James Blair. And today, the most affordable housing in New Zealand.
We're back in your life to talk about if where you live is too expensive to own a property, where else can we go?
Yeah, 100%, right? And we often hear this in the media around houses like prices being too expensive. They're unattainable, out of reach. We can't do it. Whole lot of reasons why we can't. Now, we're not saying that you should rush out and corner the market in Patia, but you know, there are definitely options out there where there are some cheaper houses.
I gotta say, Mike is the most Jaffer of Jaffers. And when he's gone through this list of places around the country, he's really educating himself.
Yeah, look, to be fair, the one that got me was the District Grey. I just couldn't believe there's just a district called Grey.
If we have any listeners in Grey, I would love to know. Please let us know. So the whole idea about today's topic is if you want to buy a $750,000 house, which is the average median house price in New Zealand as of 2025, interestingly enough, in 2015, it was $405,000.
Yeah.
So over 10 years, Mike, that kind of assumption of, I mean, people talk about house prices doubling over 10 years. Well, firstly, we've got to remember that house prices are down. So probably still pretty close to true, but our assumptions are a little bit more conservative, right? I think to double, you got to be like 7. We assume maybe
7% every 10 years.
Yeah, we assume maybe like more like 5.5, somewhere in that sort of
ballpark. 100%. We're just looking at long-term averages. And again, that 2015 to 2025 stat, you've got a pretty big run up there with those really low interest rates around COVID. But you actually saw, if you look at the long-term trend, we're kind of back around where if you took the 2021 run out of the equation and just kind of long-term average it out, house prices are back around where they should have been. So
it's like a carrot top, right? Like if you look, it went up, it went down, and it's kind of like you cut off the little up and down bit, and the trend looks pretty good.
Yeah, you cut off the little up and down bit. Anyway, enough fundamental analysis from James. So why does this matter? Look, home ownership is a really big deal for customers, right? And for everybody in New Zealand. And obviously, you know, sometimes you can't afford to just buy in the patch where you live in. A lot of people say to me, Mike, I want to buy my first home where I live in now. Where are you living? Well, I'm living with my mum and dad in Remuera. Okay, well, we're probably not going to be able to do that, are we? So we've got some strategies to get around that, and maybe some other ideas of how you can get in there.
So this is the concept of rentvesting coming back again, which the more I think about it, the more I like, where you can actually rent in a much nicer house than you can afford, and then you go and invest elsewhere. Mike, to talk about like why buying a house is hard, $750,000 house, if that's the average, that's the average in New Zealand, right? You can buy a house in Auckland for 750 grand, but there might be people who are living in quite nice parts of town renting. And if they were to buy in that area, like you alluded to, they're actually going to need serious cash to be able to have the deposit, but also service the debt.
Yeah, and it's not just an Auckland thing. This is the same as, you know, Christchurch, Wellington, Tauranga, other kind of the larger city centres in New Zealand. So it's not just isolated to Auckland. And there may be other reasons why you think actually rentvesting might be a better equation for me. You might get a better yield if you're buying somewhere else. You might be living in accommodation that's provided by your employer. You might be living in your partner's house, you know, so there are other options around how you yourself can get into the market, even though you're not buying that owner-occupied property for $750 or somewhere around there.
That's right. So after this break, we're going to break down for you the key things to consider if you're going to invest outside of where you live, and the areas in the country that are cheaper. One area has a median price under $300,000. So Mike, all these cheap houses sound great. How am I going to buy one?
Yeah, look, so first thing is talk to a mortgage broker. Don't go talk to your bank. We've got a ton of different options, different lenders, banks, loan products, and we can tell you how you can get that investment property sooner rather than later. So reach out to Lighthouse Mortgages. Now back to the show. All right, James. So you've given me the teaser. There is a region in New Zealand with a average house price under $300,000. I don't believe you.
So there is, but before we get there, let's talk about some of the reasons why we might look to invest into the regions over the big city centers.
Yep.
So the first one, Mike, lower entry price. The houses are cheaper. When we look at West Coast, Hastings, Whangarei Heads, they're still affordable.
Yeah, they are. I mean, that does come with the risk of sometimes you may not be able to find a tenant, right? It is all a risk reward trade-off. So yep, lower entry point. However, there are risks that do come with that.
But the other thing is if they are cheaper, there is potential growth. Like say the Selwyn district has grown quite quickly. You might
Selwyn's hot.
You might be able to buy an area which is going to grow faster. So that could work out, might not work out.
Yeah, and again, one of those things with that higher growth potential with the risk side, sorry to be the downer here, is if you're buying in an area which is really reliant on one industry, you are kind of focusing or you are exposing yourself to a really high level of risk. So you should be compensated with that reward.
Absolutely. Let me get back to being the positive guy that I am, though. Another benefit is strong rental demand. So population growth and job opportunities are fueling rental demand in many regions. There's not a lot of houses. Obviously, there's not as much investment as the main city centers. So I have run some numbers, and some of these rental yields are looking pretty good.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, it's we saw this a lot of where people moved out of Auckland where they couldn't afford those Auckland house prices, and they did move to kind of some of the bigger city centers. But you do see people shifting outside of Auckland to a different lifestyle, downsizing, a lot of reasons why people move to the regions.
Yeah. So, we talked about some of the benefits and Mike's touched on a couple of the negatives. I just want to quickly go back to this is not all sunshines and rainbows if you buy a $300,000 house. There's a couple of risks here. One is a lot of these areas are tied to like a couple of key industries to provide all of the demand for the area. So Invercargill's a good example. Invercargill, I don't think, it does make this list a couple of times. So obviously the smelter down there, I think that like has 5,000 employees and then impacts another 25,000 people, suppliers. There's only 50,000 people in that city. So that is a big impact if that goes away. The other big one is dairy prices.
Yeah.
So when we do think about these places, there is more risk that we might miss out on rent if there's not the demand for tenants, and capital growth. Like we know Auckland, Wellington, Christchurch can keep going up. What could happen in these areas is probably like a bit more.
Yeah, but the other thing I think the opportunity here is do some research into what's happening. I look at Whangarei at the moment and I go, they are repiling the entire train line out there. They seem pretty hell-bent on shifting the ports up there. They're building a new hospital out there. Like there's a lot of stuff going on, which is great news for the Whangarei region. And you've got the new motorway that heads up there as well. To be honest, I look at that and I go, that is somewhere where you could be chasing, capital gains and strong rental demand.
It's certainly somewhere that I've thought about for our next investment property. I wouldn't mind Whangarei at all.
Yeah.
Do you actually think they'll move the port?
Yes. I do think they'll move the port.
It's a lot of admin, a lot of work.
You drive up there and then along the entire railroad are the new piles that they've already got laid out there. They are putting some serious infrastructure work to go up there. And if you think about it, it makes sense. Like it does actually make sense for Whangarei to have the port geographically.
I get that. My problem is like continuation of government and somebody starting something and the other government not finishing it.
Let's not turn this into a political rant.
No,
though.
but one thing I think would be very cool. Imagine a stadium down at the port.
In Whangarei?
No. The Whangarei can have the port.
Bro, the mighty Northern Taniwhas. What are you talking about? They got a stadium.
Auckland to get a stadium on, because we don't have a good stadium in Auckland. How sick would that be? Opposed to, I don't like looking out at the port. I want a nice stadium to look at over the water.
Okay, all right, cool. So stadiums aside, let's get back to houses. Now, James, you've got a list here of the suburb and the district where the average property value is the cheapest in New Zealand. Start me off with the big one, baby. Here we go. Down south, what is it?
So this data is provided by One Roof. There is one suburb in the country with an average house price under $300,000. It's Matara in Goa, and their average house price is $297,000. Interestingly enough, Mike, I have been there multiple times because...
Have you?
Yeah, there is a road from Dunedin to Invercargill and you kind of shortcut through some other interesting ones on this list. So a lot of these, Grey has 3. Grey is on the west coast.
South Island.
They have 3 suburbs within there. Invercargill and Gore and Clutha, all of those sort of areas have 4 of the suburbs. Mike, there's one you wanted to talk about in Ruapehu?
Yeah, so Tominanui and Ruapehu district. Now, again, this is one of the ones I want to focus on when we start to talk about risk. So if we look at this list and look at what are the kind of common themes throughout these, right? These are in the regions, small towns, heavily reliant on dairy and kind of industries like that. You know, dairy traditionally not a huge employer of people in the country. However, you know, when we get shifts in dairy prices, that the local towns do really feel that, right? Ruapehu slightly differently. What do you think the risk that I'm going to talk about with Ruapehu is, James?
Maybe a bit of skiing?
Yeah. So the Ruapehu ski fields are really the clutch industry around that region, right? You know, there's farming, there's other things that, you know, the rest of the country does, but the tourism around Ruapehu is really the big one. And as the climate increases, we have seen, you know, Whakapapa and Turoa, the quality of those ski fields has really declined, right? So if I say I'm thinking about buying a short-term accommodation or rental near Ruapehu, that is something I would want to think about. So these are the types of risks you need to be assessing when you're thinking about buying in the regions.
Well, you'd have to be bullish on the ski fields, right? You'd have to go that, because I think they talk about a government bailout or something like that.
Yeah, the chairlift's closed and, you know, there's a bit of, you know, are they going to get a bailout? What does that actually mean? Who is going to step in? And I do actually think they've had a reasonable season there this season. However, you know, again, these are the risks you've got to think about when you're thinking about properties. And the funny thing is, I used to go on Trade Me before I owned property and just like sort by the cheapest property in the country, and they were always blocks of land around Ruapehu, and you could get them for like 25 grand, you know, just like big blocks of nothing. Yeah.
Should we buy a block of land in Ruapehu?
I always thought about that, and I was like, I wonder what would have happened to it by now if I bought it, you know, back when I was like 18 or something, and probably nothing. I'd just be paying rates on it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the rates are a fair point.
Yeah.
So let's move on to where the highest property growth rates are in the country. So obviously we've been talking a lot on this podcast about how property keeps dropping in value. You know, property's down 20%. There are some areas of the country where we've seen double-digit growth, and one region where we've gone up 24.3% over the last 12 months.
Yeah.
I would describe this as, I mean,
a statistical anomaly?
Well, it might be one house that got sold in this area. Who knows how many houses have actually been sold. I would describe this 12 months is not a very long period of time. So just remember that we're not saying that this is going to continue to be at this growth rate.
But it is bucking the trend of the country, which is down around 18% to 20% over the last 24 months.
Yeah. So let's jump into it. So the West Coast, 24.3% growth with an average house price of $444,000. So once again, if we look at that list I had before, 3 of those suburbs that we were talking about with cheap houses, they were on that list on the West Coast. Otago, 15% with an average house price of $650,000. So a big jump in average house price. Southland, 12.5%. Canterbury, 10%. Interesting, Canterbury's average house price is $550,000. Now, when I think Canterbury, I think Christchurch. But remember, it's a wider area. So Christchurch's average house price will be higher, but the region will be lower. Gizzy, 8%.
We've seen a lot of people investing into Gisborne over the last 12, 24 months. Again, you had some localized factors there. You had the floods that came through, destroyed a lot of housing, that kind of pushed the demand up for housing, and some people have, been building new build houses down in Gisborne as well to try and cope with that. But because of the shortage, we've actually seen, quite a jump in rental yields and in rental demand.
It would be interesting to see what's happened to rental prices in Gisborne over the last 12 months, just like LA as well after the fires, to go what's happened to house prices and rental yields over there.
Yeah, 100%.
So as you can see, there's quite a few house prices, Mike, half a dozen double digits, and then some other really reasonable growth rates in comparison to Auckland and Wellington.
Yeah, 100%. So why is this happening? There are different localized factors for each of these regions, but, you just think about things like infrastructure projects, roads, transport, commercial developments, are there new housing developments in the region? Because often you'll find that if you can see large new housing developments, these won't be supply-led. There will be a developer does not go and go, I'm going to stick 50 houses in the middle of nowhere and just hope that they sell. It will be a demand-led kind of factor that is driving the developments. That's often something to look out for when you're thinking of investing in the regions.
Yeah. So some really interesting, look, we're not telling everybody to go buy houses in these regions, but it is an interesting way where you can potentially, it's another strategy, right?
Yeah.
And it's not for everybody, but it's to go, look, opposed to trying to save a really large deposit to live where you want, there are other options.
Yeah, 100%. The big one here, though, is going to be, remember, if you are buying an investment property and you want to use your KiwiSaver, let's say it's your first home, you've got to be living in the property, usually for at least 6 months. So have a chat to your broker about that. Make sure that you've got that bit down pat before you go signing that sale and purchase
agreement. Imagining, Mike, you go to a client and they're like, want to buy a house, and you're like, look, I've got you approved, but you got to go move to Gore, live in Gore for 6 months.
Oh, mate, you could be a digital nomad in Bali or in Pataru. You pick.
On that note, we will wrap up this episode. Much love to Lighthouse for sponsoring this episode. Please subscribe to the channel, give us a review, give us a like, and we'll catch you next time.
Cheers.